call with
This
everyone.
conference will now be recorded.
I don't know if you heard that. I was a little late in pushing the record button, and I didn't announce that I was going to record, but it actually started. So I guess, Paula, you're next.
Hi, my name is Paula Birch. I work for IQVIA with Steve in the product management team since about 2019.
Okay, great. And Aaron?
Yep. Hi, everybody. I'm Aaron Grant. I run the solution consulting group at Flex Global. So I guess I'm here because I have vested interest in this thing working. I'm very passionate about the EMS model and that it can lead to some better solutions for our clients that we all work in. And I really like to see it, continue to blossom and grow, especially under CDISC and everything else.
That's great. Thank you. And Iris?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Iris Castillo. I'm the Associate Director for Bluebird. Joined them about 10 months ago. I happened to see this come across my desk. It piqued interest, and I wanted to hear what this meeting was all about.
Okay, very good. And Iris, you're a little bit quiet there. I don't know if there's any way you can put your volume up a little bit.
Yep, I can definitely change that.
That's
Sometimes it's a
much
little
better. Thank you.
crazy. Sure.
And of course, I'm Ken Kiefer. I can tell you, I'm here mainly because of Elvin. Elvin and Paul Fenton, who are the co-chairs of the group, recruited me to help write the spec, and I ended up getting pretty deeply involved. Paul actually ended up writing the spec, but I ended up, I guess, getting all the parties together to get it done. So that's kind of what I'm doing here as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I do have, if I'm sharing the screen here that has the agenda on there, I have about naming the primary contact for each organization. I was thinking that might take a little while to discuss through that here in the introduction. So I'd just like everyone to keep in mind that we would like to have a primary contact for each organization. Right, Elvin? I think that was something you had asked about.
Yeah, it's because I, as I say, I think actually this will start taking off more here, basically with the CDISC, and some of the changes we're doing now are significant. But so we want to be sure that we involve everybody in the industry in it, and therefore we're looking for ensuring we have contacts to everybody, so everybody have a say.
Elvin, do you have any preference as far as like what role they should have, like in their organization or anything like that, or?
I think it will end up be. I think it's important we just have a contact for that purpose at this point in time.
Yeah.
And then when we have a contact, we can always say, okay, now we need either more business insight or more technical insight at that point.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I don't think we at this point. It's more important we have a place that we know everybody get informed.
Okay, very good. So I mentioned I'm time boxing this session. We're squeezing in 3 issues, but all we really expect is that we're going to learn basically what the issue is and what problems need to be explored, enough so that we can get the work started. And basically that's just I'll keep track of the time, and if I should slip, please feel free to jump in and remind me. But we're looking at 15 minutes per issue. We have 3 issues. We'll have Aaron first, then Paula, and then finally Elvin. So any questions or anything before we get started? Okay, Aaron, you're on.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. So this issue came up actually somewhat, maybe about a year ago or so, when we were starting to do at Flex, starting to do our first couple exports out of the system. So this really has to do with what we call native files, but I think generally we can talk about them as being other renditions of a TMF record. So if you think about it, most of the time TMFs, if it's in a CRO export, whether you're transferring TMFs between organizations, anything like that, most of the files, theoretically from a long-term archiving standpoint will be PDF files. But most companies deal with some level of other versions of the file in their TMF. So, in our system, you can upload a Word document that gets rendered to a PDF. The PDF gets what's displayed, but we keep track of the original, and that's very much demanded by our clients and frankly CROs as well. Most of our CRO clients keep track of those original files, and it's part of the transfer at the end of the study to send those along with. So for Flex, we call those native files, but in general, I might refer to them that way, but just so everybody's on the same page. Rachel, I don't know, since you're the only, I think, other vendor on here, do you guys have something similar in your system?
Yep, we do the exact same thing. So if it's
Yeah.
a Word doc, Excel, whatever, that's the one that gets uploaded as like the native, like you mentioned. But there is a PDF converter we have as well. Yeah.
Yeah, Elvin, from your perspective in Gobalto land, when you're collecting documents for study startup, are you keeping track of the original files, or are you only, sending the PDFs through to, and storing them off?
We yeah, we don't do TMF per se, so we have file
Yeah.
exchange. So we, from that point of view, don't track the difference
Yep.
because we are not at the stage where we say this is the original or not,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. So we don't
No.
track that
And
difference.
we
Yeah.
also have,
Oh,
excuse me,
sorry.
Aaron, we also have IQVIA on the call, so maybe someone from there would want to speak as well.
Yeah. And I think if you could open I think it's the CR14 down there link, because that,
Yeah, I
And,
could share too. I have a couple things that I was going to show really quickly just to
okay,
make it.
you can do that too. Yeah.
okay,
If I think, Ken, you got to make me a presenter, but if IQVIA wants to go in what Wingspan does, that would be interesting too.
yeah, okay.
We
Um,
basically do the same thing. We retain native content, convert to PDF. You have the option to export both sets of content.
Yeah. And as far as like natural, since we have like kind of IQVIA the software provider and IQVIA the CRO, do you know, Paula, like from your perspective, in a normal IQVIA export end of study, would you be including both the natives and the PDF files normally?
That one I'm not sure of.
Okay.
I think I think actually we've had a request to export the PDF if it exists, otherwise export the native. That was a most recent request from the CRO. So it
Mhm.
sounds like they might want one or the other depending on what's available. So there is a
Yep.
need to export both though.
Yeah. And so that came for us, while we absolutely have the option to just send the PDFs out or the others, really from Flex perspective, we wanted to start taking advantage of the EMS model and how we do our exports. And I apologize, since I only have 15 minutes, this is probably going to get really dense really quickly into XML. But the specification, for those that don't know it, basically there's an object tag for, let's call it a TMF record, right? You have an object that would represent a CV for a sub-investigator or something like that. Any of the artifacts that everyone's used to dealing with in a TMF. And then underneath that object tag, there's a file tag. And you can have multiple file tags underneath an object tag. And if I go back to the original specification, which I think I have up right here, I'm not going to find it the right way. If I bring up the original specification, I don't know if it's Paul who wrote this or something else, he describes the object tag, and then he describes the file tag is used to encapsulate the artifact files being transferred. Each file has one entry and contains other information to verify the file integrity, describe the file format. Multiple files may be transferred within one object. For example, you may transfer the final record as well as the original source Word document. So it seems pretty clear in the original spec, the intention of the file tag was to accommodate the native files and things along those lines. Is everybody with me on that?
Yeah.
Yep. So
Aaron, I just have a really quick question. I wanted to go
absolutely.
back just for 1 second. So when you are PDFing a native file, if the file happens to be a message, are you extracting if there's a document within that message and then PDFing both, and then providing during archival, providing both the message in an MSG format?
Yeah, I mean, this is a Flex thing. I don't know how other systems handle this. When we get an MSG file in, when we render it, we'll render sort of the message as the first page on the document, and then by default, we'll render any other attachments as subsequent pages into the PDF. But in that way, we would still, what we would call the native file for that, Iris, is would be the MSG formatted original file if you were to pull that out with the
Yeah.
attachments in it, things like that. Yeah.
Thanks for letting me know.
Yeah, no worries. So what we found in Flex, as far as the specification goes, because that's what, we're here to talk about, is we ended up not being able to use multiple file tags to describe, let's say, the main PDF file and or the native file. And the reason we ran into that problem is, to kind of simplify it down, the audit trail. Well, at a high level, there's no way in the file tags to specify which file tag is which rendition, let's call it, right? There's no way you can have multiple file tags, but each one sort of is required to have all the, documents required. There's no way to send to the source, the system that's going to be ingesting this data, which one of these is the PDF, which one of these is the MSG or the original Word document or something like that. The other challenge we had is that the audit records and signature records, it's a little bit less important, but the signature record and audit record are actually contained in the file tag, not in the object tag. And for us, that's sort of problematic because we think of the audit record really tied to the object, not to specific renditions of the file. And while we can debate whether it should stay in the file or should go up to whatever, unless we're specifying one, we don't know from the specification standpoint, should we be duplicating the audit trail multiple times through the XML, which seems, something we wouldn't want to do, or doing something else from there, to make it in there. So what we've done in the meantime, which I've never been happy about, but it's sort of the only way that we can do that, is we're just using the properties to include a native file name just as a file name into the object record without really putting all the file integrity stuff on there or anything else, which I'm not happy about from a Flex perspective because now we have no checksum on the file tag. There's no integrity, all of the stuff that's built into the file tag. So that's something that that's basically the problem. I don't know if I described that too quickly for everybody to understand. Jim Horseman, since you're the project manager on Flex's side, is there anything from your perspective I should be adding here?
I think I mean, I was familiar with this from before, so I understood
Yeah.
what you were going through. So yeah, I think you covered it all.
Am I making sense? Rachel, maybe for you as another vendor, is this making sense?
Yeah, a bit. I got to get kind of like up to speed on what's happened since then, but like at a high level, this is all like making sense.
Yeah. The key for me, let's say at a high level, when we're not talking about XML, is I just want clear rules on how we include non-PDF renditions into the format. As long as it makes sense, I don't care what the conclusion is. That's the business problem we're looking to solve.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's more than one problem itself in here in what you're describing, which are fine. The communication, I think I broke it down into three different ones. The one thing that I think I said in there that there's a conflict today between the file description you said there, which I agree with the description, and on the object level, there's what is called the object copy. So if you scroll up a little,
It's a property on the object.
yeah, you see that's called object copy. It's probably down a little. We must have missed.
Yep, I'm looking for it. Object version.
Which are obviously on the wrong level. There it is.
Yep.
because that should be object copy should be on the file tag instead to meet, because that's describing if it is a copy on the original, right?
Yeah, so what you're saying is maybe object copy goes down to file copy and
Yes,
only
yes,
the
because
only the
and we
the, the main Alcoa record would be no for object copy.
yeah, and we then need to discuss, do we need more than two, because that only allows for two file tags. It's either an original or it's not, and if it's not an original, could there be more than one? Um, it's more. I think it all comes down to we need to be able to describe better what is occurring, and a lot of it has to go to the file level. Um, the other thing I described in that when we did this initial specification, we knew that both audit trail and the signature tag was not, it was sort of really basic. And the only thing we could do is move it all the way down at the bottom, because that's the only way you could sort of, in a normal implementation in a relational database, you can have an audit record associated with any object, any level in the database. The same goes for a signature, right? But the when it's XML, it becomes hierarchical, and therefore you have to have it at the, to support all scenarios, we have to put it at the bottom, if that makes sense, right? But that doesn't mean you can describe what what it's associated with on a higher level at the moment. So it's what it all comes down to. We need to start describing better all the different scenarios we deal with, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
I think it makes perfect sense. I mean, from my perspective, it's just a matter of documenting this business case and explaining how it gets,
Yeah,
taken through the model, whether there's model changes or just clarifications in the documentation,
yeah.
and how we bring it in. But
What I'm
um,
envisioning is that we will start evolving more specific cases. We'll leave, at least for now, the existing structure so we don't sort of break something. Um, but we want to describe the scenarios that are out there so we can support them better. That's the intent, right?
okay.
And with,
So,
as long we still stay within, at least for now, within the scope of completed record for
okay.
inspection ready. So,
I
so
think
that's one of the elements we need to start finding out. I think we haven't done here is talking about when we have these, when we both have the original and the copy. What is the purpose of keeping the original? And then say, is that within the current scope of the spec, or do we need to, um, yeah, just
yeah,
understanding what, yeah,
we could document the purpose. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what I can say is that's what's happening in the industry, right? That's the way CROs, our CRO clients at least, are looking to transfer TMFs back. And to me, the biggest use case, frankly, of the TMF reference model is around that CRO sponsor handoff. Um, and so while it might not be from a regulation standpoint exactly what's needed in the EMS, Elvin, from an Alcoa perspective and long-term archiving, if that's how people are going to be using it, and it doesn't support that, the adoption, if it's just being realistic, we're going to have an adoption problem unless we take care of it.
no, 100%. It's just that whoever received the file need to understand what the meaning is of getting it, right? That's what it
Mhm.
all comes down to. So if it's outside,
Sure.
um, but so in the original we had this exchange agreement where all these things should be explained. Uh, I don't know if anybody have been using that or if you've been using that, but it all comes down to the receiver need to know what is the meaning of it. If they don't know what the meaning is,
Mhm.
then it it's not useful even if it's exchanged.
That's what we've fallen back on. That we actually haven't had a anybody import one of these, but we would have that exchange agreement where we would explain that in the metadata area, we'd have that native file name as how we, if there's a Word document associated with this PDF, that's where you'd be able
Yeah.
to find that and import it, because it's going to be, the actual file is going to be included in the package, and that's how you'd be able to find it.
Yeah, so in this scenario, I think if we just talk about it here, if that object copy got moved down to file level, then that would solve that. Is that correct?
Uh, it could it could be used to solve it, yeah, where you're basically flagging one as the default, and then you
Yep.
need to have guidance that says, the audit trail, signature record, whatever, only goes on where the object copy is no or however it's defined. Where you only,
Mhm.
I think it would be problematic to start duplicating the audit trail between multiple file records to
Yeah, I
the
agree.
exact same problems you were mentioning earlier. But like without going that deep into it, I'm happy to look at other things. But that could be a simple way where at least the data model would be consistent, where you can communicate that, and we'd be able to take advantage of the file tag instead of using a named property.
Yeah, just at the kind of like nitpicking a little bit though. The native file we wouldn't consider it a copy necessarily. Like
Yeah.
maybe there's another, like that object copy could also contain something like native, or even like audit log. There's some migration scenarios where there's another PDF rendition that's not a rendition of the content of the document, but it's a PDF of the audit trail of the other system that could not be transferred across, so it came as basically a PDF rendition associated with the document. Scenario like that. I don't know how important that would be to solve, but we could use object copy and call, have additional tags on it.
I think.
There's
Mhm.
Oh, sorry, go for it, Elvin.
Yeah, no, the only thing I'd say there is I think we need to deal with them more specific. That's what at least what I'm intending to do. That if we deal with the one that's related to the record copy and original or copy
Hmm?
is one thing, and then audit trail, if that's a way of doing it where you do like a copy, then that should be we'll solve that as a audit trail issue. So I think it's multiple problems we need to solve, but I think we need to solve them individually. Is
Yeah, and
that
I'm going to break in at this point because I think we did a great job of exposing some of the issues. And anyone who's on the team can certainly join in any follow-up meetings um, that Aaron or uh, and possibly Elvin will organize. I'm not sure. At the end of this meeting, we can talk about who wants to work on which issues, which might require other meetings outside this forum. So, if I may proceed, I'll ask Paula to speak next. Now, Aaron, can you unshare your screen?
Yep, absolutely.
And Paula, did you have anything to share?
I have a really short presentation that I can pull up. Oh,
Okay,
I
I'm
don't
gonna.
seem to have the ability to share though.
Yeah, you will in a second. um, Wait a minute. That isn't working the way I thought it would. Oh, here we go. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. You should be able to present now.
Okay, so I'm not in presentation mode, but I hopefully you can all see my screen.
It's good.
So in our last meeting, one of the topics we discussed centered around, are there other fields that need to be exported as part of the standard to allow for easier import? And part of the reason for that discussion was because I might have been under the erroneous impression that this standard export was supposed to be able to be read back into a system without much user intervention, and that might have been a naive impression on my part, but it did lead us to evaluating the standard a little bit further, which is kind of what I did on my own time. And also, we did manage to talk with one of our representatives from our CRO to get some feedback from their clients on their use of the export. So I wanted to go over that first. Um, so I guess the first point is that so our internal CRO client rarely uses the TMF exchange mechanism format unless their customers request it. But I will say off the bat that the reason for that isn't all because of the standard. It's also because of some issues we were having and we have since resolved. But let's just say that they don't have a lot of experience using it. It's not their preferred method of exporting at this point. But the issues that they do have with the current standard include the fact that the requirements are somewhat vague and leave a lot of room for interpretation. And this is a quote that they said it's not a true standard, and my assumption is that means because not everyone's forced to use it, that it can't really be considered a true standard at this point. I think that the fact that we're now I don't know if partnered is the right word, but we're under CDISC will help with that.
No problem.
They, they said that customers don't care for the folder structure. So for example, the folder structure in the standard doesn't really allow for separation of country and site level documents. We are actually
Paul,
incorporating this. Oh, go ahead.
I was just under the impression that the current standard doesn't enforce any kind of folder structure one way or the other. Am I wrong in that?
It may
Uh,
not enforce. Oh, go ahead, Alvin. I'm sorry.
No, yeah, the only thing there's the hierarchical structure that's in the individual tags and how they in how they're set up, and depending on what the meaning is. But at least I understand what the message is here that Paula is sending. But that's the only thing I'm saying is the file tagging structure in XML is the folder structure. Plus, there is of course
It
TMF.
Well, you shouldn't. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the XML structure can be totally different than the folder
Yeah.
structure. Anyway, Paula, you could probably keep going.
Yeah, I think they're just looking for maybe stricter requirements.
Mhm.
They want the ability to separate out country and site level documents. So we've actually incorporated that into our software. And that actually is, we were able to do that because the requirements allowed us to, or the lack of a specific rule
Hmm.
about site, country and site level folders allowed us to do that. They don't care for the suggested main folder label, which is, I think, the date and time of the export. They prefer the study name to be the main folder level, and I think that they wind up renaming it. Another piece of feedback is that the target system is often a file share or SharePoint. And overall, just that they prefer their metadata in a spreadsheet in addition to the XML.
Is Paula, is that thing, the target system's often a file shares SharePoint? I'm assuming that's because then the XML file doesn't really give them any browsing capability or something like that. Is that right?
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
I think, I mean, they didn't elaborate on a lot of these points, unfortunately, so I'll have to follow up with in another meeting. But I think personally for me, sometimes the lack of specific rules and the fact that a lot of it is open for interpretation means that we as a product team are unsure of which way we can go and what will betray the standard, what still works with the standard, how can we meet clients' needs while still honoring the standard. Um, and
So Paula,
obviously this is the feedback we've received. Go ahead.
yeah, it's interesting. I was just going to say from the site, the country and site folder levels, we um, I think what we use is object level can be trial country or site. So that would then designate, okay, is this a country document or a site document? And then you would expect then to have the site information, site ID provided along if it's a site level document.
Right. Well, they want, I should have been more clear on that point, but they want the country and site level documents separate in the folder structure.
Hmm.
So we already export all that information, but they want them separate. And now we are separating them now. This was a piece of feedback they gave us, and we've done something about it. in our most recent version. But
Oh, okay, so you're talking about here the actual like location within like how you browse for the file?
Yeah, Jim, not
right,
not the XML structure, the structure in the file system.
The
right.
structure in
So
the file
so I'm
system or
talking
the
about feedback on the standard, but also it's not just the XML. It's also just the folder structure we create based on the overall standard.
gotcha, okay.
Yeah, and at least the way I read this and understand it is, and which I agree with, is this about we need more specificity in this different scenarios. We need to start covering this. How do we do different scenarios much better? Um, and
Well, I
therefore
guess
it's clear how to deal with the different scenarios. That's how I read it. Um,
with
yeah, go ahead.
without getting too deep into this, because I know we only have a certain amount of time and Ken's going to cut us off no matter what we're talking
About
about.
5 minutes.
I think what we're seeing, if I'm summing this up in how I'm seeing it overall, is the EMS is designed as a system to system transfer. And I always think I come from regulatory, so I think of this as like ECTD. The idea of ECTD and the idea to me of the EMS isn't specifically to make it easy for a client who doesn't have a TMF system to just open that up and view it, and that becomes their browser into the TMF. It's meant to be a way to codify all of the records in the TMF in order to get it across. If there are ways around that, like some ECTD structures actually put a style sheet around the XML, so you can double click on the XML and it opens in a browser, and actually you could navigate around the whole TMF that way. And that's something we could look into supporting in the future, that almost there's like a little browser, web-based browser that gets embedded into the EMS. But that might be one there. The other thing, Paula, that I think we see all the time that you're very much in, I'm not saying that your clients are contradicting themselves in, and we see this all the time with end of study transfers, is there's a Windows limitation of 256 characters, and yet clients always want their exports EMS agnostic. They always want their exports in like nice file folders so they can just click on the site folder and have whatever. But every extra thing they add into that folder path makes that path longer and longer and longer. And then you run into problems where you can't export that zip file or things like that. So I think that's something the EMS should probably take a stance on, as far as what their line in the sand is and how to avoid that, because we end up going back and forth with our clients over and over again, especially the CROs, as they get pushed around by their clients who want all these folders but then can't unzip them. So then we go, and then the pendulum just keeps swinging back and forth.
Yeah, we get it all the time, and the reality is people don't understand that it's a Windows API issue. There's nothing we can do. They just want to replicate what they see in the system to say, like, I drilled down this folder structure to get to this document. How come you can't replicate that in the export? And it just comes back, well, when are you going to fix it? And if we could all point to, a standard to say, here's how you can visualize the EMS export once it comes out of the system, and it's not by replicating the folder structure in in a Windows folder directory type of way. That would be great.
We could
Let me
also
I,
release a free viewer too. Sorry, Paul.
oh no, that's okay. No, I mean, I was really just going to repeat something that we've already stated. I think for me, and this is easier said than done, but it would be great to have more specific requirements about what can or can't be done as we think of situations and scenarios, so that it makes it easier to figure out how to meet the client's needs without, going against the standard. But yeah, I agree with you in terms of Windows file path length. Sometimes there's just something there, you can't solve every problem.
if I'm understanding this right here, because it comes back to that what Aaron also said, that the current what we're talking about here is the exchange mechanism, that it is an exchange. But as I'm reading these problems here, that these are not related, a lot of them are not related to the exchange itself. It's how they see the data after the exchange, if I get it right. And of course, the exchange limit what you can exchange, meaning you can't maybe do all these um, multiple dimensions in how you can see data in a relational database. Do I get that right to some
Yeah, and
extent?
we have the same thing going on at Flex because most of the time it's a CRO who's trying to produce this export, but they have no control over or they they have so many different sponsors and they have different TMF systems, or
Yeah,
maybe they don't even have an eTMF, and so they're just most interested in what the output is and
yeah,
making sure that for everybody it's going to look the same way. So that's why they just concentrate on the export and not the exchange part.
yeah. So
Paul,
it's more they're trying to give a view. Here is the final, and you can verify it. So it's actually easy to verify that this is the deliverable that
Exactly.
they promised.
yeah. Paula, one thing we do that might be helpful, and I'm not advocating that this is like, part of the standard. There's probably better ways to solve this, but we give an XML file with our exports, and we give a CSV file that's more just a straight listing of all the artifacts, that you're exporting, and that's much more consumable. Like when you're on the file system or SharePoint, it actually has links to all the files in there and things like that. So that's sort of what, if somebody was just opening it up on the file system, what we recommend they use to browse the TMF, not the EMS file itself.
We did do something similar. Again, I'm talking about like a release that hasn't quite yet gone out the door, but we're generating an additional file in addition to the Exchange file, or will be in this next release, and that should help with that problem. Um,
Yeah,
but
one
it
of the
kind
things.
of leads to the next,
Mhm.
and I'm running
Yeah,
out of
yeah, yeah. I'm
time, so I don't
curious.
want to keep.
Yeah, go for it.
But the next
I want to
topic
see
is
it.
just like whether or not like there are additional fields needed in the stand. I guess I was thinking the more we can include in the standard, the less needs to be included in any other file, even though you still may need a file to kind of summarize your listing of documents. Are there any other field values that are missing from the standard? And this is where I don't know if we really have time to go into this today.
The the one piece I wanted to bring up based off what I'm seeing here, Paula, is are you aware in the standard that there's a flexible metadata model that lets you add whatever field you want into any object? And what I
No, I
mean by
was
that, because
not.
I saw kind of complaints earlier about it's not, it doesn't incorporate all the fields, and I seeing missing field issues down here, and like translations, things like that. There is like in the specification, there's a flexible tag called metadata that's a child of the object, which basically allows you to define any property you want and put a value in for it. So like that's where we're putting things like descriptors, document dates, like, statuses of documents, things like that in there. So like translation, you could easily put in as a metadata field. Am I making
Okay,
sense there?
that does. I'm surprised I didn't see that, but thank you for pointing that out. I'll definitely take a look at that.
But I would say things that we should have as standards should also be extended to the model, so it shouldn't be in that other metadata. The, so for now that can be used for sure. But if it's something we all agree about should be part of the TMF exchange, we should extend the model as needed. It's just a matter about we do it in a way that people can consume it, or organizations can consume it.
Okay, my alarm just went off. I think that was pretty good
You
timing.
need to give us a 1 minute warning here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, maybe I should start doing that. Paul, I'm sorry you had one more page. Was that anything that you
It
wanted?
wasn't anything we needed to look at. It's really just a list of fields that our system supports that the
Okay,
standard does not.
okay.
But again, I realize there are differences between
And you can
systems.
share them if you want to. Then I'll take a look at them. Just shoot an email to me, so then I'll
Yeah, we
comment
did.
on it.
We want to,
Really,
yeah, the
really good
fields is going to be
conversation.
interesting as we go. Sorry, Ken, keep going. Paula, what's your email address?
Uh,
It should
Paula
be in the
M.
invite.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
it's on the
Oh,
invite.
sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll do that.
Yeah, go ahead.
No worries.
Yeah. Okay, very good. All right, so then we'll move on to Elvin. And Elvin, because you're last, you maybe get a little less time than the other people.
That's okay.
Because we're going to need a few
I'll
minutes to
survive.
wrap up to talk about follow-up. So I'll
Yeah,
stop
yeah.
you at like 5 of.
And I'll see if you can share. So the intent of what I'm talking about, it's coming back to we for the longest have tried to find use cases related to what we are, yeah, the whole exchange mechanism, so we could define it better. And I'm trying
I
to
have
see.
you on as presenter now, right?
Okay, yeah, I was just trying to open the right window here. Where did it go? Just give me a second. Am I presenting? No, share screen. Okay.
According to what I have here, it says you are the presenter.
Yeah,
Uh,
just
Wait a
dismiss.
minute.
Not
Yeah,
sharing.
I think so. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Oh, maybe. No, I need to change system preferences and reboot before I can do it. So
Oh,
I'd have to talk through this. I don't know if you can open. Do you have that ticket open? Else I'll just speak while I'm doing it. It's like my system preference doesn't allow me to share currently.
so what would you like me to do?
The ticket that's called, the change to exchange mechanism specification, the one that's called strategy transfer.
In other words, do I have that that I could
Yeah.
show?
What I'll do is I'll try to share it in the.
I think I do have it. In fact, I know I have
Or
it.
I'll speak. We don't have a place to comment. There.
Let's see here. Was it?
It's this one. It all comes down to that. Uh, Everybody want end of study exchange. And what I think I've started to realize is that all different, especially CROs, have different scopes that they assign. So the change request here is to start describing the exchange up front. So instead of having we just doing the exchange itself and the scope of what it is, we want to be able to better describe when in the beginning of the process of what is the exchange intended to be, what is it that is expected on the receiving side, and therefore you can start defining completeness of it. So you can do we can start doing tests that relate to what is in this exchange. And in the reference model itself, that's called the TMF plan. So the purpose of this is starting to digitalize what is called the TMF plan itself. Um, so we better can describe what is expected in any of the exchanges. So that's sort of the overall gist of it. So on one hand, we have what Aaron you have brought up with the file level exchange, where this here is intended to better describe in detail what will be in individual exchanges, but do it from the beginning, from the day that it's set out. And therefore, of course, you also have set the expectations for the receiver, in that case, the sponsor, of what they will be getting. So that's sort of the gist of it. And with that, it will also include the TMF plan, include the indexing, the folder structure that was mentioned before by Paula. It also describes who is responsible for what, and all these elements. So it's digitalizing what is expected of an exchange, if that makes sense. And
Am,
this is
am I
basically,
displaying? Am I displaying what you wanted me to
yeah,
display?
yeah,
Oh, okay.
correct.
Is there any particular part you want to see?
No, I don't. I think that's the heading there.
Okay.
If that makes any sense, what I just said. But the intent here is to sort of upfront describe what is in any individual exchange and digitalizing the framework of it. Did that make sense to anybody?
I think it makes sense, Alvin. And I'm not necessarily, I don't get involved in these types of discussions back and forth between CROs and sponsors. So I don't know what kind of level of kind of knowledge they have around the technical capabilities, but I suspect that there might be some gap there where this could be adding complexity to that discussion that I would worry about. And potentially when the answer is, oh, I'm not sure. The experience that we've had so far mostly has been that, like I said a little bit earlier, that there there is an intent to potentially exchange this TMF, but we don't know what the target's going to be at the time, even that we're generating the export. So most of our work has been to create something that's going to be able to be exported in a generic way that potentially somebody could import in the future. But so I like the idea here. I just wonder if the people who are going to be putting together this TMF plan would stumble over the technical aspect of trying to um, complete, the technical component of the exchange part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, go on. Go on.
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess if I'm interpreting this right, and I'm probably not, it almost seems like you're looking to define, for lack of a better word, like an expected document list that would come over with the transfer. Is that right, Elvin, in some way?
That would definitely it would be, the scope would also be defined. So in the end, yes, it's a
Yeah.
minimal framework. So it's a framework of what the exchange is. And
Yeah.
initially, we need to find out what is sort of the MVP of this from a solution, from a technical point of view, to support the exchange. Um, but it all comes down to, we could never define the scope of it. But what I started realizing is that this scope is defined by each individual scenario, and so we need something that describe what the scope is, so we can say upfront, this is what is delivered, because end of study varies per study, right? It's all depending on what was outsourced, what was the functional.
We see clients where they outsource everything to IQVIA,
Yep.
and we see clients where they have different CROs managing sites in different countries, where they have another FSP that's doing data management, another FSP that's doing safety. I mean, I think that describing that is useful, and I think clients having an understanding of that is useful. I'm worried, and maybe I'm like jumping too low level, because all I see obviously that I've established on this call is XML and not business requirements. But to me, like, I'd be worried about trying to encapsulate some of this in the XML. Just as a vendor, a lot of this stuff is like the key difficulties that a lot of clients have in managing their TMF, right? Describing what should be in the TMF versus what is there is generally a challenge from a business perspective, even for a CRO that's managing all of their TMS, because every trial is so different and whatnot. So while like giving guidance to clients on how they might define this, I think is fantastic. Incorporating this into the spec might be a technical challenge that if I'm looking at what Paula's feedback is, right, from sponsors so far, they're saying like they don't even know what to do with this XML. So asking them to start defining, which document should be coming from where might be too much for them right
Well,
now.
think of an example. Like the example I was
Yeah.
thinking of is like, okay, so you have unblinded content or restricted content. So Elvin, are you suggesting like a decision would be made in this type of document that would say, there's unblinded content in here in this study, and we're going to make a decision about basically how that's going to be exchanged?
Over time, that could be definitely a part of it, but initially, think about it as we need to have an MVP of it. We don't want to do 100% of this of the TMF plan. It's not intended out of the box to do 100%, right? It's just enough that we can say this is what expected. So when you do, because it all comes down to, if you have done it, the spec today says it need to be inspection ready. Well, how do you define inspection ready? You have to have something that say that this is what you are exchanging. Else you. So this is what you're expecting, and therefore I have a test that meets that expected need. And so it's something that describes that. I understand that it seems like it's too, we always have this, it's the elephant that we are trying to eat in one bite. How can we start breaking the elephant down in bites we can define?
Is
Okay,
this
well,
an EMS thing, Elvin, or is this a system overall, like TMF reference model overall thing?
So it's so a TMF plan in its as a whole will be, depending on how many vendors that are involved in it, will have one big plan, right? But the intent for this purpose here is to have it for the individual exchange. What are you responsible for in this exchange? Because in the end, you get assigned something. At the end, there will be an exchange of what was now between the CRO and the sponsor normally. So what is the scope of what this is? It's defining that scope and using the TMF plan for that and digitalizing that. But what I'm hearing also is that the sponsor likely is not in a position to have a tool that can do this. Is that what I'm, that most of the problems come into the less experienced sponsors, and therefore they more want something that's low tech. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I guess my this is my knee-jerk reaction, and Ken keeping me to 2 minutes here. I think you're
yeah, we got to.
if I'm just going off like my experience in the industry, it like, and maybe I'm looking at it differently than you are because you're thinking about just transfers. Sort of what you're describing in here, as far as like which documents are required based off these business rules and everything like that. A lot of that, that's a that's a complicated problem. I'll just say right now, like overall for the industry, um, to specify. And like Flex has a ton of different services and all kinds of stuff. Everyone's always doing, has lots of different like ways to solve that problem, but none of those are like boiled down to just like, oh, you're doing this type of work. Well, we'll just pick out this like, template here, and everything will just match up to it. We're always finding nuance trial to trial, and every trial seems, they're using these 3 kinds of informed consent forms, and this other trial is using these other 4 kinds of informed consent forms. And that's like our trials is special flower. I think it would be difficult to come up with there's the essential documents that are required for every TMF that the TMF reference model defines. And we could maybe pivot off of those as like a way of doing a check. But to me, it looks like we're adding something to the TMF reference model or the exchange mechanism that maybe is handled somewhere else, which is trying to sort of describe the appropriate documents that need to be in the package instead of what documents are coming across in the package, if I'm making sense.
Yeah, I think,
but let's, yeah. Go.
Yeah, we better conclude.
Ken wants to cut us off.
Yeah, it's 10.
People are going to start dropping off, and I wouldn't blame them. So what we really need to do is figure out follow-up for all of these things. So I think practically, because we really don't have much time left here to discuss that, would be Elvin, you and I, we can contact each one, both Aaron and Paula, and determine how we might like to follow it up, because we've uncovered so many issues. There's going to need to be some prioritization and organization. So, but I think this is a really great start, and appreciate everyone for being here. Is there anyone who has any parting questions or comments?
Hey, this is Bob Toll. I joined really late. Hey, Jim, good to hear your voice. It's been a long time. I was just going to mention that if it hadn't been mentioned already, that we can get direct input from our CRO, division of IQVIA. They're very interested in this initiative, and we can definitely get some great input from them. I think it would be helpful.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Okay. Anybody else before we sign off? Okay.
No, I think we just need to arrange more meetings. That's all.
Yeah. I think Elvin and I are going to have to huddle on this a little bit, and we'll get back in touch with you, Aaron, and Paula, and everyone will get a link to this, provided this works out well. And there'll be another meeting next month, I think probably toward the end of the month, and may have some in between if we decide to deep dive into some of this stuff. All right, I think that's it. Anything else, Owen?
No, I need to
Okay,
roll to another meeting. So
okay, all right. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll be in touch.
yeah, thank you for all great input. That's all I can say.
Yeah, very good, very good.
Thank you.
Thanks,
So,
everyone.
thank you.